Well, hello, and welcome to this episode of The Terri Cole Show. I'm so psyched that you're here. This episode, we're talking about blended families. We're talking about step families. And many of you may or may not know, I talk about my kids and my grandkids, and I don't say step because to me, there is no step between us, right? I didn't have biological kids. I married my husband 25 years ago, and I married these children who were young teens at the time. But, officially, I would be considered, obviously, a stepmom. My children's biological mom passed away when they were little kids. And so I am interviewing and having it's almost like a girlfriend chat is what it feels like to me. Her name is Jamie Scrimgeour, and she has the KICK-ASS Stepmom Podcast, and she specializes in stepfamily dynamics from her own experience. So we had a whole entire conversation about sort of the things to avoid, the pitfalls, the beauty of blended families, the things that you can do that make it better, the things that you can avoid to not make it worse, because there is a lot to think about when you blend families, whether that means that it's two families with already existing children. In her case, she married someone who was 12 years older than her, who already had 3 kids, and then they went on to have another child together. And it's really just all the ins and outs of step parenting. And I really hope that you enjoy this interview with Jamie as much as I enjoyed interviewing her. I am super excited to welcome Jamie Scrimgeour to the podcast. Welcome, Jamie. Sure. At the top, I was talking about all the things that you do and how kind of we met, and both being stepmoms and all. So I really just want to start with this whole movement, right? Like I look at what you do, and I feel like it's a movement for stepmoms in blended families, and this is an underserved population. That is in my own experience, therapeutically and every other way. People just expect it to be like easy. So start with telling us what have been your struggles and your triumphs, let's say, of being a stepmom, and just give us a little bit of the background of your life story and how you came into this blended family.
Yeah, for sure. So before I got together with my husband, so he was recently separated, 3 kids. They had been separated for, I think, 6 months at that time. So before that, I was a child of divorce. So I grew up with divorced parents. And I really used to get rid of my dad's girlfriends for sport. Like I was like the worst. If you were dating my dad, it was just not good for you. I was just that child of divorce. And so I grew up, background in psychology, social service work, and I worked in child protection. So that's like the KICK-ASS here in Canada. And so, I had experience working with co-parenting and, dealing with the exes and how it impacts kids and all of that. So when Darren and I got together, I was like, okay, I got this. This is not a big deal. Well, it turns out being the expert on the outside and living it in real life are 2 completely different experiences. And I came in, I was 26. We had a 13-year age difference. He had 3 kids, so 5, 8, and 10 at the time. So that's like you're in the trenches of running around in sports and all the things. And, I think the biggest thing for me was I was trying so hard to be perfect, trying to be the perfect stepmom and solve all of his problems and have this hearts and sparkles co-parenting relationship and have the perfectly dressed kids and perfectly behave and dinner on the table every night and all those things. And, that only lasts so long until you're really resentful and really angry and overwhelmed. And so that's kind of where I found myself. I was sitting on the bathroom floor with some wine and, just your stereotypical breakdown. And so basically what happened from there is I had a decision and I thought about leaving. I thought, everyone thought this was not right for me. I was in over my head and I was like, man, they might be right. Like maybe I did not know, but I made a decision that day. Something had to shift and I was going to do it. And I was going to thrive amongst the extra stress. And I went to the internet for support though. And there was just so much negativity, like the ex-wife bashing and, you know, the turf wars and all of these negative memes. And I was like, you know, all those vent sessions, fine, but they're not going to help. They're not going to make anything any better. So, you know, fast forward a couple of years after a lot of work on myself, you know, therapy, really focusing on my marriage, you know, my tendencies for perfectionism, like all the things, I started to blog and started to create the type of support that I was looking for. And it just kind of took off. So now I coach stepmoms. I have a podcast. I have a membership space and lots of resources because I just felt like there's this double standard, right? Moms are supposed to keep it real, but stepmoms were just kind of being left out to dry and supposed to figure it out on their own. And I just didn't think it was fair. So I basically started to create the type of support that I was looking for.
Amazing, because we're also talking about the negative stereotypes of stepmoms so much of the time, where my friend Kate Northrup talked about the woman that her father married as her bonus mom. And I was like, oh, that's so sweet. Like where there, it didn't have that connotation. And although I married a widower with 3 teenage sons 25 years ago, I never said step because for me, I did not have biological kids, right? For me, there was no step. So I didn't really have that feeling, but I know for many of my therapy clients, there is this sense that there's a judgment on that. It's not as good as others. And for you, you went from having a lot of control in your life, being a single person, to going into an established situation. So how did you manage the anxiety that arises from that sense that you have no control when you're a recovering perfectionist and someone who likes to control?
Well, what's really interesting is that being a stepmom has really, all my triggers and all my wounds and all the things I've kind of pushed back, they were there. Like you couldn't really ignore them. And all my problems really just came to the forefront during that time period. And my anxiety, I realized I'd actually always had anxiety in my life. And it was just on fire, right? I was so anxious all the time. Felt like I could never get anywhere on time. I was always in a rush, always had this feeling, this heavy feeling in my chest. So for me, dealing with the things I didn't have control over, and I still don't have any control over them because, you know, we're 10 years in, and just spoiler alert for stepmoms, all the things you don't have control over now, you don't have control over in 10 years. So the change starts with you. Just, I'll save you the work there.
Right.
For me, just dealing with it, just diving into myself, really, really nourishing myself. And I use this example, you know, if I'm taking care of myself and, you know, working out, doing my personal development, doing my reading, just like focusing on my marriage, when we get a lawyer's letter about, you know, an ongoing battle, or I come home and there's dishes in the sink from the teenagers who have trashed the kitchen, it doesn't affect me the same way. You know, I have so much, a long game perspective in those times, but when I'm giving and giving and giving and trying to be perfect and trying to show up for everyone. And, you know, you speak a lot about codependency, like, oh man, like, was that ever me? Then that's when I snap. And that's when your anxiety, you know, you just spiral. So it was really, and it sounds so corny, but it really was about just pouring into myself and not giving up so much of myself for everyone in my family. Because you know, the people who are judging you and thinking like you have something to prove, they're going to judge you no matter what. It doesn't matter what you do. So you got to let that go.
Yep. What do you think about, though, because codependency in blended families, from my own experience as a therapist, is, I mean, listen, codependency is an epidemic everywhere, but what was your experience, or how do you help stepmoms who are being codependent in their sort of new or the blended family? Because a lot of people come in, I mean, you ended up having children with your husband, right? A daughter.
Yeah, we have a daughter.
Yeah. So then you added to the blend by bringing another kid in. And so I feel like there's all kinds of different situations, but what is your advice if someone, do people even know, do the women in your community even know they're codependent? That's the first question.
Well, they do, since you've been in our membership, since your interview. No, and I think in our heads, we're like, well, it's his problem, or it's our problem. Or, this is my problem because it affects me and I do it better. So I'm just going to take over. And, one thing that you said during one of our podcast interviews that really struck was the urgency. Like when something comes up for your partner, the urgency. And I had such urgency, man. I would drop everything I was doing and I would Google some precedent setting cases. I would respond to the lawyer's letters. I would make points for him. I would reply to emails for him. And then at one point I was like, you know what? I'll just communicate with her. You guys are fighting, so I'll just do it. It's easier if I do it. Well, yeah, it was easier if I did it for him, but I was picking up my phone and having almost like my heart beating out of my chest out of anxiety because I didn't know what to expect. And it was affecting my ability to show up. Mm-hmm. And so I think when you have that urgency and you're doing everything, you really have got to check yourself. And I always say, there's two questions I'm saying when you disengage as a stepmom. Is my involvement helping or making matters worse?
Yep.
And is it affecting my ability to show up as my best? And it's hard, right? It's hard to take that step back, but it's really interesting what happens and how much they're capable of when you do that. But I really had to, and it took me till a few years ago to fully, I don't even communicate right now with my husband's first wife, not because there's huge conflict, but because they've got it. Like it's good. I've got my daughter. I'm here to support my stepkids in every way that I can, but it's not my thing.
It's not your thing. What's so interesting because, when I was, you were interviewing me for your podcast in the community, the conversation, there's no way to talk about codependency in blended families or anywhere and not talk about disordered boundaries. Mm-hmm. Because really what we're talking about is that the nature of codependency is disordered boundaries. That's what it's built on, because the overgiving, the overdoing, the inserting yourself into the middle of that situation, right? Which is none of that is your side of the street, right? Mm-hmm. Meaning you can't fix it if you weren't there for the original injury, And I remember thinking this when Vic and I got together, and there was, just a lot of not great things happening with the kids. They were acting out, trouble, and the law, and oh my God, many things. And I got everyone into therapy immediately. I was like, I can totally do this if we get the right support. Like, it can't be me, even though I was already a therapist. Got into a lot of therapy, and a lot of times it would just be Vic would go with the boys, or they would go this Vic and then this one kid and then this other kid or whatever, because I knew if I centered myself in the therapeutic process, what needed to happen would not happen, because I wasn't there for the original injuries, and it wasn't my side of the street. And I'd had a lot of therapy. I was already in my early 30s by the time this was happening, so I'd had a ton of therapy. But it took a lot to be like, this is not your thing. This is not your thing. And of course, we would have family meetings at the therapist sometimes, but it was really more about my husband having to step up and be like, what are you going to do to make this right? To do whatever you need to do to have effective communication, to not have people punching holes in walls, to do whatever it is. And you can't be like that either, which I feel like that stepping out can be so anxiety provoking and yet so relieving at the same time.
Mm-hmm. It is so freeing. And I just want to say, I know there's going to be stepmoms listening to this right now, and they're like, no, where's my role in this family then? I am their wife. I am their stepmom. I'm a 50% parent. We are not undermining your role here. That is not what we're saying. So I do feel like if I would have heard this at the very beginning, I would have had a lot of yeah buts. Just listen to it with an open mind, because one day you'll be like, oh, yeah. And it becomes so clear. And now I have to tell a story. So I've always really helped I used to love writing court documents when I worked at Children's Aid. Like there's the whole process of just like writing out a court document. And so I would always help my husband prep when he was dealing with lawyers and stuff, and it saves money, right? Because lawyers are extremely expensive. So I would do those things. And then sometimes he would be super busy at work. He's like, well, you just want to respond to the lawyer for me. And sometimes I would, and even still up until recently. And, 2 weeks ago, he calls and we got a response back. He goes, do you want to email that to the lawyer and like let him know our position? I was like, yeah, I'm good. You got this. So it comes in phases. Like I had stepped out of so many things 2 years ago, 3 years ago. And as you go on this journey, you become a little more free. And even that point, I literally thought of you. I'm like, Terri would be proud of that.
All right. So what I am proud of that. So what do you say to stepmoms whose partner, this is what I've gotten quite a bit in my therapy practice. Their partner is letting the ex run roughshod over them. They're ignoring. The ex-wife doesn't follow the rules, brings the kids back late, is dumping the kids on, and all of these things affect that person. And, it's always like the debate. So I'm going to say something to her. So then a lot of times my clients would be fighting with the ex. And then all of a sudden, like the husband's kind of like you're saying out of the mix, but you figured it out through the therapeutic process. What do you say is maybe the first step? If someone is in that situation where they've taken on the ex kind of, how do you put the onus back on the side of the street of your husband to deal with his ex?
So if you've started the pattern and doing it and now you want to step back.
Yep.
I think you just have to say, this is affecting my ability to show up, and I am not doing this because I don't love you or because I'm mad. I'm doing this because I do. Right. And I think that's the big thing. People are like disengaging is like, you know what? Not my kids, not my problem. You're not doing things how I want it to be done. I'm overwhelmed. I'm done. That is a very ineffective way to disengage, because chances are it's going to not improve your relationships. Right. So it's about saying, I'm not okay right now, and I need to minimize my interaction and disengage from this situation. And for me, disengaging doesn't have to be forever. Right. Sure. You can do it for a period of time and you can come back in if that's what feels right. You can just take a step back for a period of time. And, but just saying, I'm going to take a step back and I need you to take over this. And then when the ex reaches out, you can just say, hey, I just think it's best right now that you and, insert your partner's name there, deal with this. And, I just feel like it's probably a better idea. And just be straight up and honest. And if you went all in too much, apologize. You can be like, I made a mistake. I was really trying to do something here and it's just not working. So we're going to revamp this. And it's not as hard as people make it out to be. It's actually not. Once you say it and maybe deal with that initial reaction from them, and then you have to follow through, because then when you get the text message, you say, can you just send this? Like, ask them to forward it.
Yep.
And it feels really good.
It does. I think it's getting over the giving up control. Like there's a part of, if you're a perfectionist, if you're a codependent, if you're a control freak, which many of us are, because we're doing all the things, it's really being like, however it gets done is okay. It's not about perfection, and it's their situation to work out between them. Doesn't mean that you and your husband, you and your partner, you and your wife wouldn't have something to work out, right? You may need to have the conversation like, hey, as you said, I need you to step up and handle this because it's negatively impacting me and I can't take it on and I don't want to. I'm going to step back. So you're sort of giving a warning. But another thing that comes to my mind when we're talking about this, James, is like, it also requires believing in your partner's capability, even if they haven't so far shown it great, right? It's okay. Like, have faith that they are capable, because what we're saying, like the subtext of what we're saying when we jump into things is like, I will do this better than you. I don't think you can do this. Even if our heart is saying, well, I wanted to spare them from it, or I knew it was stressing them out and I didn't want them to be stressed. But when we go to let's go to the base of codependency and disordered boundaries, but codependency in particular is, what is it at its core, besides disordered boundaries? A covert or overt bid for control.
Yeah.
And it requires, when we really heal from codependency, it really requires us to understand that control thing was a whole illusion to begin with. And that there's something very profound about surrender.
So true. And, something that really has helped me when I do give up that control, or if I find myself really anxious about a situation, I like to just walk myself through it. First of all, if you're dealing with your husband or your partner and their ex, it's not your first rodeo. You kind of know how this is going to play out, right? Like, I think as women, we just kind of know. So walk yourself through. Okay, how could this play out? What could be the worst case scenario? What am I scared of? Okay, what's going to happen if that happens? How will I react? Okay, everything will work itself out. What's the worst thing that could happen here? And you look at it from a big perspective, 5 years from now, is it actually going to matter? And challenge that, right? Because sometimes, even when stepmoms are fighting with their partner about bedtime, right? Man, bedtime was my thing. We had some good blowouts about bedtime. And, what happens if your stepkids stay up 45 minutes later? They're tired the next day. There's consequences. It's natural. It is important to have these things. But I'll tell you, there were a lot of fights over bedtime, and my stepkids didn't go to bed when I really thought they should. And they're turning out to be stellar adults. They made up their sleep. You know what I mean? We look at these things like they're huge deals just because someone's not parenting the way that we want to parent. And check yourself in that moment. Okay, what is this actually about?
Right.
Because it's probably not about bedtime. It's probably a reminder of your insecurities about your role as a stepmom and what that means, and, da 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 da.
Yeah, exactly. And then you have the situation that you were in, where you come into a family system and then you bring a baby. You and your husband have your daughter. So how was that? And how did you negotiate it or manage it, or, I don't know, I can't think of the right word, but navigate it with the kids, and how did the ex respond?
Well, the ex didn't really respond because we didn't give the ex power to have opinion, right? And so maybe she responded, but it wasn't a conversation that I had with her. Right. And I know that, or my partner, I know a lot of people say you should, are you going to tell the ex, or you need to have a conversation? It's I think at that point you're giving people permission to have an opinion, and then that kind of blurs the boundaries there. So there really was no conversation. We never talked about it the whole time I was pregnant. If we saw each other, but we didn't really see each other that much, just kind of at hockey. And then we had the baby, and, she actually gets along great with Reese. It's interesting. Sometimes they'll be at a hockey game and we're not really talking, or we're not hanging out, but Reese is kind of running back and forth. But the dynamic was really interesting at the beginning because she's the thing that brings us all together, that we all have in common. And the kids were so much older that they have this, she just has these cool older siblings, right? My stepson has 17 now, and he's like, hey, Reese, you want to go get some ice cream? So they pop in his truck, and, she's hanging out with all of his teenage friends, and which has its pros and cons, but it's just special. But it was really interesting for me because all of a sudden I was a lot more empathetic to the role of a mom. I think about what it would be like for me if someone were to do things for my daughter in that way. And you just kind of have a lot more grace, right? Because these situations don't always bring out our shiniest qualities at times when our emotions are running high. So I became a lot more empathetic.
It's so interesting, I think, when you it's not the same as like putting yourself in someone's shoes is not the same as actually wearing the shoes. So you're saying when you had your own child, you're also sort of in a different club to a degree, like where you would have maybe not that much in common with the ex, but becoming a mother yourself, that binds you too, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And it was really interesting. And, you know, at the very beginning, I didn't have a time where I was just staring at my baby and the days were long. Like we had a baby and then we had hockey, you know, like nothing really stopped because my husband works long hours. So, you know, I was at home, so I was doing a lot of running around. And, you know, at one point I did have to set some boundaries and say, you know, I have to be here for a race and you guys are going to have to figure out hockey. Like I can't be trucking this baby around all the time. Like we need to get her in a routine and stuff. So, you know, boundaries changed when life changes too. And I think that's okay. Like people need to know that as life evolves and you find yourself in a new season, it's okay to say, you know what, this isn't working for me anymore.
Right. And also being able to prioritize what is your priority at that point. You had prioritized the other kids the whole time until Reese came. And then it was her turn when she's an infant and, you know, needs to be prioritized. But you feel like the other kids understood.
Oh, yeah, they understood. And I think sometimes stepmoms can get in their head about that. Because like, well, does it mean that I don't love them as much? No, it means you have a baby and it's at the same time as hockey and bath time. Like, you know, you're juggling all the things. And naturally, we all have to have a shift here. So I think we need to give ourselves some grace there too when things change, when a baby comes, because you can't keep being all that you were.
No. There's just not the bandwidth. So in your community, because I think, you know, people listening or watching this on YouTube might be interested, what is the community about? And what would you say is the most challenging thing that the members in your community share?
Well, I think, you know, when I started the community, it was because I was hearing a lot of stepmoms say to me, hey, Jamie, loved your post. I wanted to comment. I wanted to engage with you about this, but I don't want my husband's ex to see it, or I don't want someone to see this online. Or I don't want anyone to know I'm following a stepmom blog, which to me is like, really? So there was a lot of just this need for connection and a lot of needs for, I was getting, you know, the same questions over and over again and that kind of stuff. So I think a lot of stepmoms are just struggling with this double standard. Like moms can say, man, like what a long day. Can't wait till these kids go to bed. When a stepmom, they say that, it's like, oh my gosh, didn't they know they had he had kids? What did she expect? It's like, does anyone know what it's like to be a parent until they're actually a parent? It's like, you know, you don't know what it's going to feel like. So everyone was just looking for these raw and real conversations that no one, even including me, didn't feel comfortable having online. So in the membership, we have a forum. We have stepmoms from over 30 countries around the world in the membership, which is so cool.
Amazing. That's so cool.
Yeah. And I do office hours where you can pop on and ask me questions about things that are coming up. We have interviews with experts. You can apply for a free coaching call and I record it and share it anonymously with members of the community. We have unfiltered podcast episodes and you get discounts on coaching and other resources. And then we release monthly workshops. So on like disengaging or, you know, setting boundaries, improving your relationship with your stepkids. So it's a lot of stuff in there just where you're looking for next level.
What I think is so great about what you're doing and what your mission is that, as I was saying at the top, you know, this underserved community, a place to be real, because motherhood, step or bio, is complicated. And we have a lot in societies, North America, Europe, everywhere. You know, I've had mothers from 192 countries in all of my courses, and it's complicated everywhere because
It's so crazy.
Right. There's this whole thing of where mothers are put on a pedestal, and then you might have that stepmothers are more vilified. But the realness, and I think that there's something so healing about what you're doing in your community, is you're allowed to be tired. You're allowed to be frustrated. You're allowed to feel like you don't know what you're doing. I remember when maybe it was a year or two into my marriage, and I remember saying to my mother, because the kids, it was just rough. It was a rough time. The kids were acting out still. It was like family therapy, but still it was exhausting. And I remember saying to my mother, I was bawling my eyes out and calling her, and I was like, this isn't what I signed up for. I'm crying. And she was like, hello, this is exactly what you signed up for.
Like, you just didn't know what it was.
Right. She's like, you didn't have 3 secret kids. Like, you knew. And she's like, Terri, you are doing a great job. And you're allowed to be afraid, and you're allowed to feel like you don't know what you're doing. But you're a loving other in their life. And what's interesting is that was my goal, right? Because my kids' mom passed away when they were little kids. And I'm only 14 years older than my oldest son. Mm-hmm. So I was like, I want to just be someone good, someone supportive, someone who loves them unconditionally, someone who can show up and be present even when it's hard. And it was hard to not want to just run away and be like, not my problem. But, you fall in love. I mean, I loved them. And I definitely could have used your community to normalize my experience, because I really felt like, I wouldn't give up because that's also my personality, but I was like, am I doing damage? I remember talking in therapy and being like, I feel like I'm making so many mistakes,
Yeah.
And she was like, hi, you're a human. It's fine.
Yeah. But it's just, it seems like there's a lot less forgiveness for the stepmoms when they make a mistake, right? Than the moms. But, I think it's really good that you're speaking about this too, because there's a lot of stepmoms in my community who are in the same situation as you were. You weren't dealing with a ex, but you were dealing with grief, and you were dealing with that's a whole other dynamic as well. And what I love how you recommend, like, you just got everyone into therapy right away, right? Because, well, first of all, I think that's a benefit for anyone in this situation, but you really did come into this and provide that support that they were looking for without trying to take over. You were going to be the other, you're not trying to replace. And I think that's also where stepmoms really go wrong.
Yep.
The stepmom is not the mom. If you get your head around, it's not the same role. You take out the competition piece, right? Even though I'm a motherly figure in this home, I'm their stepmom, and that's completely separate. And I don't have to be like her because I'm like me, and there's no competition. And that's what I find really helpful.
I think that distinction is great. And you can take from a page from the Kate Northrup book, right? You can say, I'm the bonus mom, right? I mean, to yourself. I'm not saying say it out loud, but think of yourself that way.
Yeah. And, it's really interesting. I actually did an interview with Mary T. Kelly. So she's a stepmom therapist and does a lot of coaching with couples. And she says, the only people who get to decide that you're a bonus mom is the kids. Like, they get to decide if you were the bonus, right? Which I thought was super funny too, right? But, bonus mom works for a lot of kids and a lot of families. I think, I was saying the other day, my stepson, I don't know why he didn't know the name of my podcast. Like, they know what I do. And I told his friend that my name of my podcast is the KICK-ASS Stepmom Podcast. And I thought my stepson was going to spit out his root beer. He was like, what?
You're like, yeah,
I am.
Correct.
Yeah, it's just really funny. There's so many different players to consider.
There is. Well, this was such an illuminating conversation. Please tell anybody listening or watching where they can find you and your community.
Yeah. So my website is jamiescrimgeour.com, and you will obviously spell that in the show notes for everyone.
Yes,
and I'm on Instagram at Jamie Scrimgeour. It's the KICK-ASS Stepmom Podcast. You can listen wherever you listen to your podcast. And yeah, the information on my workshops and coaching and membership is all there for you.
Well, thank you so much for spending so much time with us today. I super appreciate you.
Yeah, no, it was great.